Hi there, welcome to my talk. How Tom Cruise can help you make video games. My name is Isaque Sanches. Follow me on Twitter and Facebook or whatever. Let's jump into the talk. Part one, is this a joke? Like the title of the talk is a bit on the nose. Is this a joke? Yes and no. Let me explain why. So you know a lot of concept artists struggle to define what concept art is. You have a lot of great concept artists that work on concept art that is so detailed that it almost looks like illustration. And to give you a sense of what I mean, like look at those two screenshots side by side. They're basically the same. They're not the same, but this one is really detailed. And there's another kind of concept art that is more or less this. If you compare the two, they are the same, but like this one is a sketch. Some people wouldn't call this concept art at all, and some people wouldn't call this concept art at all. They would call this a painting. So concept art actually lives in between those two realities. So this concept art could take 30 minutes, right, to make, and the other one could take 24 hours or actually 40 hours if you look at the more extreme examples, like this one. This is to a lot of people this is actually cheating. This is not concept art. It's marketing material disguised as concept art. It's when a company wants to showcase the process that they have or the ideas that they have. They will usually not work on stuff like this during development, but afterwards they will polish up the images. And if you look at this one, for instance, this one looks like a Renaissance painting, right? So it could be 1 hour. For instance, if you let's think of this like this. Like this is actually, I doubt that this type of concept art could help an artist when they're actually finalizing the actual assets for the game. But this one, which is simpler, and to whoever might say that sketching without color is not really concept art, like in this example, that this is actually not concept art. Like a lot of people use this, right? Like not polishing up to the full extreme, right? Like a lot of people will use this kind of concept art, like you can see here and here. So like when you ask an artist, like how much time will it take to make a concept? Usually this is actually a question that is circular, right? Because time can mean two different things. In this case, the time to the same artist could do this and could do this, right? So in this case, time could be should I make one type of concept art or another? And it's not binary, right? It's a spectrum. Or it could mean how much time do I need to make type A or type B, a specific type. These two times are not the same thing. We call it time, but they actually refer to different dimensions. One of the actual time it's required to perform a certain style of concept art, like labor, if you want, and the other is a time in the sense of scope. And the point of this talk is that time equals Tom Cruise, right? So, like, again, is this a joke or is it not a joke? I'm going to explain this premise, but first I have to talk about Tom Cruise, this man here. Tom Cruise is a very famous actor. He seems to not be aging at all. Is an actor that is very famous from action movies, but not only. Whenever he's on screen, is usually either preparing to run and run for quite a while, or actually running. and it's not a thing. It's not a thing that I've pointed out, or a unique idea. Like everybody knows that Tom Cruise runs a lot. This is a thing that is actually a product. Having Tom Cruise run in a movie, as you can see by this headline, is a thing that actually sells the movie. And this is so established that at this point, even Tom Cruise bans other people from running in the movie. He needs to run. Okay, Tom Cruise needs to run, and let's just make a small pause here to appreciate how much Tom Cruise runs. Right, even if it's not an action movie, Tom Cruise will run like as if his life depended on it. Tom Cruise needs to run. Tom Cruise in these examples is not running. Running is Tom Cruise. Okay, whatever the movie is, like this one is from Rain Man, right? It's a story about a brother, two brothers, like trying to like. This one is from The Firm, where he's a lawyer, and as a lawyer, he runs like a professional athlete. So why am I talking about Tom Cruise? Well, I'm a game designer and the founder of Not a Game Studio. We at Not a Game Studio, we work on several weird projects, such as this one, which I'm not going to talk a lot, but it's coming next month, Uranus, and another one that's coming next year called Who Killed Mr. White. And so Who Killed Mr. White is a detective murder mystery sort of game that is turn-based and with cards and whatnot. It's very narrative-based, but it's actually a game that if you go back to it, we initially play tested as a board game. Right now, the idea is this: like the game has this. We finished the look and feel of the game. We're just finishing up the dialogue, but in the beginning it was like this. And to pick up an idea like this and make it such as what you saw in the earlier slide, we had to do a lot of concept art. And in the beginning, the way we approached it was going with several iterations of more and more detail. Where we tried to figure out the different personalities of every character, and we tried to give them more and more life, and to find a style as we were progressing and as we were developing. The idea was, of course, we did a lot of stuff that we didn't, as research, that didn't make the final cut, but we ended up like this in this concept, if you want, and then we implemented. But we did a lot of iterations of concept art, and this is actually a way of doing it. We're going to focus on that later on in the talk. But we went and did several cycles, if you want, of research, visual research, with more and more detail, to a point in which we were just trying to fine-tune light and mood, like small stuff. But if you compare the jump between these images and the earlier images, like we really, at this point, we were really just focusing on smaller details. So this is actually a real story, where during the development of this game, I asked our artist how much time it would require to do a certain concept. And as we've established, time is not equal to time, right? Like there's two types of time. Time could be the time that it requires actually to do a specific type of concept, but it could actually mean also what kind of concept throughout, like the detail that you've seen, like all these layers of detail, where exactly we would position, like what was the scope of the detail of the images that we were trying to produce. And basically, was the concept like this, or was the concept like this, right? Like, where should we position that new concept? it was really difficult to verbalize because those two images are polar opposites, and to pinpoint exactly where in this scale we wanted the concept to be, or to agree on that. Basically, what I said was, I don't know if you've ever seen Toy Story. There's this scene in Toy Story 2 where you have this man. He's very meticulous. He's a pro. It's an old man, and he's repairing the main character. And you see that he takes his time. He loves his profession, and he's a pro basically. Like he's meticulous. He's rigorous. Like he's basically he takes his time and makes it like completely. He's basically a pro. It makes it as the best as possible, right? And the polar opposite of that is you have Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is running, and he's running. Not everybody runs like Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is the embodiment of running. Tom Cruise is running for his life. So there's actually these two polar opposites, and we made the scale. And we tried to understand exactly what we were trying to say. So this on your left you have full Tom Cruise running, and on your right you have full Toy Story, the old man of Toy Story. And we used two sketches to make sort of these 2 points. And I said, okay, so the concept that we want is somewhere in between here and here. And it actually worked out. At some point, we ended up using it again, and we started having a difficulty of trying to understand what kind of Tom Cruise we were talking about, because there's several layers of Tom Cruise. You have Tom Cruise running like this, and you have Tom Cruise running really fast, and you have Tom Cruise running so fast that he doesn't actually care if there's ground below him. So we actually had to make a scale of different levels, just so we wouldn't be using a cursor or making a dot on the line, just referring to it as either Toy Story 0 or Toy Story 5, or Tom Cruise 0 or Tom Cruise 5. Since they are the opposite, they would match up. As you might guess, this is not very practical, so we dropped the Toy Story angle. And actually, calling stuff Tom Cruise is more fun. So we basically started using, let's do Tom Cruise 5, let's do Tom Cruise 4, let's do Tom Cruise 3. And we were starting to have fun with it. And actually, it helped somewhat in some cases. This is actually what I want to talk to you about, because basically, if we were to use that in our meetings from then on, we guessed, like, let's do that as a joke, but maybe this could help, right? Like maybe this can help us. So let's talk about the Tom Cruise scale that we developed at Another Game Studio, and let's define it. So this is actually a scene from a movie called The Firm. I already talked about it. Tom Cruise runs really fast, but he's not careless, right? Tom Cruise avoids getting hit by a car. Tom Cruise never falls to the ground. Tom Cruise actually has a lot of care, even though he is really in a rush. Right, like it's not doing things without care. It's being in a rush. So if we were to talk about how we would use the Tom Cruise scale, remember that it's not just doing things with laziness. It's doing things with high pressure, because Tom Cruise is a guy that is. Like he's a pro. In a way, it's a different kind of pro than the old man from Toy Story. So, like, the first thing that you should do, if you were to use the scale, is defining exactly what Tom Cruise 0 and Tom Cruise 5, and we're gonna go and explain why 0 is problematic later on. But what exactly Tom Cruise is, and in this case, in the parallel of what we had already shown, these are an example of two images that could be the scale. But if you're going to use it, like just using random numbers means nothing, right? Like you have to position your scale on real references, because artists need real references. And again, this scale could be a lot of things. Like you could have a scale that is really divergent from like a thing that is really wide. The minimum and the maximum can be really different. Or you could have the two things being really close together. It really depends on you, and really depends on what you're actually doing at the moment with your project. Another thing is that Tom Cruise is always positive. Sorry, Tom Cruise is always positive because, one, Tom Cruise cannot be negative, which would defeat the whole purpose of the scale. So if you could go below 0, this wouldn't make much sense. So and Tom Cruise cannot be 0. So instead of going from 0 to 5, actually what you should do is going from 1 to 5, or to 5 or 6 or whatever, but never 0, because and that is the fundamental law of Tom Cruise. All labor involves some amount of Tom Cruise. If you wrap your head around it, this is actually something that we discovered as a concept. It would make much more sense to do it like this, and basically to say that the more perfect you are, the less Tom Cruise you have, but you always have some kind of Tom Cruise. So if you would start always at 0 and having increments of it, like it simulates better perfection than just having a random origin and going infinitely negative as well. Another thing, why you need Tom Cruise? So right now I'm saying Tom Cruise a lot. Again, it's sort of a joke, but it's also not. And to understand what I'm saying is that imagine you are actually trying to apply this, and your counter argument would be, yeah, but at our company we actually use real words and use real concepts. We actually do planning and time estimations. We use Jira, and we use Asana, and we use Monday.com, and we plan things by using Agile. We do a lot of Agile. We use shirt sizes, and we do story points. What I'm trying to say is not that, oh, well, yeah, that's very fun, that's very cute. Are you some kind of amateur? Fuck story points. Let's do Tom Cruise instead. This is not what I'm saying, okay? Because again, Tom Cruise is not an effort estimate system, right? This is not. What I'm not telling you to drop everything you know and use Tom Cruise. What I'm advocating is that you use Tom Cruise as a side tool to communicate during meetings or during planning, right? It's not a substitute for that. And we're going to get into why exactly that is the case. So let's start with the Mona Lisa problem. So you're at a meeting, right? And you think, okay, we're going to do the Mona Lisa, right? And you say, Tim, guys, we're going to make the Mona Lisa. And Susan here says, that's great, John. And you ask, okay, how much time do we need to make the Mona Lisa? Everybody thinks of the Mona Lisa, and she says 5 months. He says 12 months. She says 3 months, and this guy says 1 week. And that's actually fine. It actually happens a lot that different people will be at different levels professionally, and those discrepancies can happen, right? But sometimes it's not that, because when you talk about time, actually, again, you can be referring to two things, right? So instead of thinking about Mona Lisa, Susan here could be thinking of making the Mona Lisa in 3D. And I don't have names for other people, but like, I don't know, like this guy is thinking about Shrek, and this woman is thinking about Stickman or whatever. Like they could be interpreting what Mona Lisa is differently, right? So the Tom Cruise scale actually enters at that point in the meeting, and you could say, yeah, but okay, that's why documentation is for. Right, you don't need to start talking about Tom Cruise at meetings to define the scope of the Mona Lisa, because you can just document what the Mona Lisa is. To that, I would respond, yes, but documentation takes time, so it's not very realistic that you would be at a meeting and just stop the meeting, spend 1 hour documenting what you're actually trying to talk about, and get back to the meeting. Sometimes you just need to convey scope on the spot. And documentation doesn't solve everything, right? Because you can have everything documented and still have someone, even though it's documented, be thinking about Shrek, right? So just by drawing this graph on whatever, and doing this small exercise, you can have your own team be on board with what exactly you're trying to say. Another thing, however, furthermore, is that usually in software development in specific, we think of a task and trying to come up with a time to, like, how much time the task is going to require. But that's not really the case always, right? Like, imagine it's Christmas, and okay, we have to do. We have to release a Christmas thing, a Christmas Mona Lisa, if you want. Like, it's right around the corner, and we have clearly this X amount of time, right? So it's not really a question of how much time does it take to make the Mona Lisa. It's a question of, we have this amount of time, what kind of Mona Lisa can we make? And a lot of times, like, I don't know why we don't focus on that, but a lot of times it's all about that. It's not really about how much time it requires to do one thing. It's usually about what thing can we make about with the time that we have. So it's basically what kind of Mona Lisa, right? Like all these Mona Lisas represent different Tom Cruises, and actually, instead of using shirt sizes or whatever, instead of trying to do estimates of time, sometimes it's actually much more intuitive, but much more useful to do estimations of Tom Cruise. Actually, this is such a useful tool that by measuring what kind of Tom Cruise we're aiming for, it could make a difference on like, just a small amount of Tom Cruise can make a lot of difference on the end result. And you can see here, like, if you conceive a certain graph where all these images were put in, you could see that if just a decimal of Tom Cruise would change completely what the team is thinking about. Let's talk about the cliff as well. So here's basically the need to use Tom Cruise, but let's talk about something else, which is much more important and much more useful. So imagine a cliff, a car, and your Mona Lisa is inside the car, and you have to perform a certain task, which is you have to go forward and hit the brakes at a certain point that will have you touch the flag that is at the bottom, not at the bottom, but right at the end of the cliff. This could go this way. It could go another way, which is you hit the brakes too soon and you don't you don't hit your goal, or you could also go overboard and fall off the cliff. So establishing your Tom Cruise limits is actually really important. Not only defining the scale and defining references, but establishing Tom Cruise limits is really, really important, because if let's say that if the flag, instead of being here, was here, the scenario in which you fall off the cliff would be really stupid, right? There's no need for you to go that far. So you need to establish minimum Tom Cruise, and you need to establish maximum Tom Cruise. And what are those? This is minimum and this is max. So what are those? Just to reiterate, this here is the maximum amount of imperfection you can get away with. So the maximum Tom Cruise. And this one is the amount of perfection that will kill you. So the minimum Tom Cruise. So you basically get this gap here between the flag and the end of the cliff. And we're going to call this the Tom Cruise gap. This is actually a really important concept, and actually something that can be really useful to you during development or during a pitch. Let's talk about the Tom Cruise equation that derives from the Tom Cruise gap. The Tom Cruise equation. So the Mona Lisa again. There's actually, think of it this way: you could print the Mona Lisa and have it be printed in basically one stroke, in one time, in one cycle, or you could have several rendering cycles of the Mona Lisa, right? Like these two approaches are actually different. This one is recursive. This one goes from point A to point B. Or if you don't like that, let's think of cutting wood. You're cutting wood. Like cutting wood is a slow incremental process. And you could cut wood this way as well with a katana, right? Like you could cut wood just with one stroke. Or, in other words, another example, there's this style of painting here that depends on one stroke. And that style of painting is actually, like you cannot achieve this effect by going slowly. But also, if you make a mistake, the whole painting is ruined. So to put that into words, you have the quote-unquote single-stroke method, which is faster but riskier, because again, you can mess up and basically the whole painting is ruined. Or you could, again, thinking of the car and the cliff, not finish on time and have the work being complete. And you have the Bob Ross method of going slowly and making love to the canvas, as he would put it, which is the iterative method, right? Which is slower but safer, and safer also in a lot of quotes, because even though you can finish early or go over scope, and it's still a body of work, it can look really goofy, right? So your equation should be: how many iterations do I need? And how many iterations can I afford, right? Basically defining this gap. Because basically the concept that we have to introduce here is the degree of Tom Cruise, or the degrees of Tom Cruise that you need. Let's say, for instance, in software development, if you are making a game, if it's a game that is very system heavy, it would be natural to start with the white box thing, and then over several cycles, go over several levels of Tom Cruise. So this would be high, very, very high Tom Cruise, a bit lower Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise really, really small. But you go into several degrees of Tom Cruise throughout the development, right? So when you're at a meeting, instead of just talking about the gap and instead of just talking about the overall Tom Cruise, what Susan could say would be, okay, John, that's great, but how many degrees of Tom Cruise are we talking about? And John says, great question, Susan. 3. First, Tom Cruise 7, then Tom Cruise 5, and then Tom Cruise 2. Yeah, so, and basically that you have a better notion of exactly what kind of development you're doing. Part 6, the Tom Cruise paradox. With that, you can also identify a Tom Cruise paradox. And what is a Tom Cruise paradox? By the way, just a small note. It should be clear right now that I'm not talking about concept art anymore. Like, I think this applies to game development in general and development of anything in general. This could actually help you in design as well. It could actually help you in a lot of stuff. We started off with concept art to explain how we came up at Another Game to do with that concept, but basically use it for anything you'd like. Okay, let's get back to Tom Cruise paradox. So, remember this gap, right? What the Tom Cruise paradox is a situation in which you need simultaneously the highest Tom Cruise possible and the lowest Tom Cruise possible, meaning that instead of having a maximum and a minimum, the two are inverted and you have a negative cliff. So instead of this, you will have something like this, which is nonsensical, right? So in this case, and we're going to go to examples really soon, but in this case, what Susan should say would be, okay, John, that's great, but isn't this a Tom Cruise paradox? So imagine this, right? Like you have a lot of games, for instance, that are systems based, and games that are systems based should have a or start with a really high level of Tom Cruise. But for instance, if you're making a narrative game, you should start off with the lowest Tom Cruise possible, right? Because if you iterate a lot on your story, or if you change, if you don't have a single stroke approach with a narrative game, then your story is going to suck, right? So how can you make a game that is system based and very narrative at the same time? So there's actually a lot of solutions, clever solutions to that. One of them is having two Tom Cruise cycles. You see that a lot in RPGs. For instance, let's look at Mass Effect. Mass Effect clearly has, like, the development of the combat system was done independently of the choose your own adventure system or the dialogue system. Like, the narrative was clearly done in a different Tom Cruise cycle, because like and you see that a lot. Like we've inherited cutscenes or the paradigm of having gameplay and story because of that. Because if you were to bridge the two, and now there's a lot of companies trying to do that, doing immersive storytelling. But usually the problem of merging the two is that it's a really slow process and it has a lot of iterations. So another solution is basically ignoring the other stuff. So you have games like Dear Esther, which kicked off a wave of games that are not systems based, are very narrative based. And basically what they said is, how can we bridge a good narrative with a good gameplay? Let's make the gameplay non-systemic, right? And the other approach is what we've had since the beginning of video games, which is, yeah, let's just ignore the story. Like Lara Croft shoots a dinosaur. Why? Because that, like, we're gonna figure out later on what the story is. But yeah, we just want to have her shoot a dinosaur because it's a really huge enemy. Yeah, so there's actually a third solution, which is having no solution, and remaining in that negative cliff. So to see what a paradox in this case would be, let's look at the genre of point and click that died because of this. So like here, in this game, the puzzles are very art-driven or narrative-driven, and the art is dependent on the puzzle design as well. So to have a consistent puzzle design, you need to do as much iterations as possible, or start with a high Tom Cruise. And to do consistent world building, you need to start to do as few iterations as possible, or start with low Tom Cruise. So you can see how this is a problem, and you can see, for instance, how by having a puzzle that doesn't work, you would need to change the entire scene or the entire set, and have ripple effects on the art and basically on other puzzles as well. So imagine that in this case here, I never played this game, but there's a pizza box on the ground, and there's a pizza slice. on your inventory. It could be the case that in the beginning this was a pizza shop, and they made a puzzle with pizzas, but then because of budget constraints, or because like the pacing of the puzzles didn't work, they had to cut the pizza shop, and now they have to awkwardly put a pizza box in the ground. I'm not saying that this is what happened. I just took this screenshot of Broken Sword in this presentation, but I've actually never played it. But I mean, if you are familiar with the genre at all, you know that a lot of point and clicks have are infamous because of their use of moon logic, which is what happens when you try to deal with that paradox. And here's a game that I think is a great example of this. So this is actually one of my favorite games of all time. It's called Gorogoa. The gameplay, if you want to see it here, like it's a bit hard to describe, but it's usually intuitive when you see it. The gameplay relies on imposing panels on top of each other and rearranging them, zooming in and zooming out, so to trigger animations and make the story unfold. And it's actually really clever. But if you look at it, this is actually a Tom Cruise paradox, right? The puzzles rely on illustrations. The puzzles are dependent on animations. The puzzles are dependent on illustrations, and illustrations are dependent on puzzles, right? Like it's this cycle of basically having a lot of Tom Cruise levels and Tom Cruise degrees mixing together, right? So how did the creator of this solve this? So here's an interview, basically where he says that exactly that of changes having ripple effects that constantly changed everything. And the way he solved it is he didn't. Because of it being a paradox, it took him 7 years to finish the game. And it's an incredible game because of it. But remember, if you are dealing with a paradox, it's actually really tricky to pull it off, right? Like it's an impossible situation because it's a contradiction. So we've talked about the Tom Cruise scale. We've talked about the fundamental law of Tom Cruise. We've talked about the Tom Cruise gap. We've talked about the Tom Cruise equation. We've talked about the degree of Tom Cruise and the Tom Cruise paradox. Now we're going to talk about the final topic, which is part 7, the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. Right, the Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. What does this have to do with Tom Cruise? Absolutely nothing, but actually, like, I have to talk a bit about the Fast and the Furious to explain why it's here. So, the Fast and the Furious is a franchise that is ludicrous and awesome in the worst ways possible. And one of the worst movies of this terrible franchise is the Fast and the Furious, which is really a terrible movie. And in that movie, there's a scene where someone does a drift in Tokyo, I guess, and this thing happens. I think it's not really easy to see this on the video stream, but basically what you have is a car that's doing a drift and going so close to the wall that it's barely a millimeter from crashing. And it's over the top. It's insane. It's really stupid. It's camp, total camp. Like this whatever. But it really gives you a sense of it's really a good image, a good mental picture to make you understand what the Tokyo Drift is in this scenario. So the Tokyo Drift in this scenario is a Tom Cruise gap that instead of being negative, is actually so tiny that has basically zero gap, right? It's the case of the flag not being, it's the first case of the flag not being so far from the cliff, but the flag being really at the end of the cliff. And this actually makes it a problem, right? Because it's really harder to not fail in this scenario. So just to make sure you understand, it's not a paradox, right? It's not negative cliff. It's not that there's a contradiction. it's that it's really, really, really a tight spot. So if it was a paradox, Susan could say, okay, John, that's great. However, this is a Tom Cruise paradox. Therefore, it is impossible to pull off. But the fact of it not being a paradox means that actually it is perfectly possible. It's just really, really hard. So the question that the person, John, would be asking is, can it be done? And the answer is, of course, yes. But should it be done? Right? Because in that same movie, right after that scene, you have this other scene of another guy trying to perform exactly the same thing and crashing his car. So yeah, this could be you, right? Like doing a Tokyo drift is incredibly hard. I don't know if a Tokyo drift is a thing, but let's call it a Tokyo drift. And yeah, so let's look at an example. This is another game that I really, really love. One of my favorite games as well. It's called Outer Wilds, and it's a game where you visit planets on foot and in a spaceship. Like, it's a solar system, a really, really tiny solar system, but you could play around 30 to 40 hours of it and not finding all the content. And it's incredibly beautiful. It's an exploration game, a puzzle game, it's a narrative game, it's a systems-driven game. It's very, very complicated. And to describe, you have to try it for yourself. It's really, really amazing. What I want to focus on is, when I first saw this map, I was really disappointed. When I was playing the game, even though it's that many hours, and even though the game is gigantic, this barely passes as a solar system. Even also because the scale is really, really minuscule. We could do an entire lap of a planet in 10 minutes, which is something that is not remotely similar to the planet Earth or the bigger planets on our solar system. But as you're playing, you're saying, okay, no, actually this makes a lot of sense. This is really cool. I feel that I'm traveling between planets, and it's actually not that tedious. However, let's look at the team. It's really a small team. They couldn't have done more than this. They actually did a Tokyo Drift. They did as much content as they could. And they could have done more content. They could have said, okay, this doesn't look like a solar system. Let's make a lot of extra content. But they would have failed. They could not have possibly pulled off that amount of content with such a small team, right? They could have also done the other route and say, okay, we're going to cut content, but actually, with less content, with less planets, it wouldn't feel like a solar system. You wouldn't feel like you're traveling between planets. You wouldn't feel this rush of you're now an explorer. And basically, they did exactly the amount they needed to do. They pulled it off amazingly. So sometimes the reward outweighs the risk, right? Like, sometimes the question to should it be done is, yeah, sometimes it's your only option. If you have a team that small and you're trying to make this game, you really don't have a lot of options. You want to make this game, you have to try to do that impossible task of nailing the scope and the Tom Cruise level exactly on the spot. So yeah, sometimes it feels like a suicide mission, because it's still a suicide mission. Even if you agree to do a Tokyo Drift, have in mind that basically you're probably going to fail, right? So going back to that meeting, what Susan should have done was, okay, John, that's great, but you're asking us to do a Tokyo Drift. Do you take full responsibility if this ends up being a total disaster? And John looks at her, and there's an awkward silence in the room. And maybe they're going to think things over, right? Maybe they're going to change their plan. Maybe they're going to agree. But now they are completely aware that this is incredibly tight, and that the Tom Cruise gap is incredibly narrow. So we've talked about all of this. We've now finished with the Tokyo Drift. But that's basically it. I hope that you found the talk fun. You're not required to, if you want to use this, to call it Tom Cruise, but I hope at least that you could have, that these concepts might help you in the future if you want to try them out. But to us, the idea of Tom Cruise as a communication tool in meetings actually helped us a lot. So you're not really, don't use them as they are. Like, this is a part of a joke, part not a joke. But the part that is not a joke, I hope you're gonna find it useful. Yeah. So that's it. That's the end of the talk. Follow me on Twitter if you've liked what I've said, and I'm gonna look at questions and answers. Okay. So at Tom Cruise 5, concept art is quick art, and Tom Cruise 0 is detailed concept art. Yeah, so this question might have come up during the talk, but I've explained two things. So let's go back to this. The fundamental law of Tom Cruise, it's fun to say that. The fundamental law of Tom Cruise says that all labor requires some degree of Tom Cruise. So you actually don't have Tom Cruise 0 at any point, right? Like, you should always have, let's say, if you want 0.1, but never 0, right? Because that suggests that you should have negative Tom Cruise, which is actually impossible. But yeah, basically Tom Cruise 5 is running, rushing for your life like Tom Cruise, and the more Tom Cruise you have, the more you're rushing. Your talk about Tom Cruise is running, but nobody asks why Tom Cruise is running. I don't know what that question is. Why is Tom Cruise running? You have to ask him. Why isn't the Tom Cruise scale an effort scale? Because an effort scale, again, the beginning of the slides, I tried to demonstrate that when we talk about time, we are talking about usually two different dimensions. One, the time that it's required to perform a certain task, and the other, the nature of the task itself, or the scope of the task. So the Tom Cruise scale, it does not try to answer how much effort is involved in doing X, but what X is. I don't know if that makes any sense. Yeah, I think there's no more questions. Okay, so that's it. Thank you. Be sure to follow me on social media. Thank you for being here and listening to this.